There's a specific kind of nausea that comes from watching wealthy people eat caviar while clapping for orphans. It is all theater, a polished veneer of goodness over a rotting core of vanity. I'm Chloe, and I built my empire on this hypocrisy because it was the only way to survive the people who raised me. My parents didn't just leave me. They traded me for a hashtag, abandoning their teenage daughter to travel the world as ageless influencers. But tonight, the filters are coming off. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The lights dimmed in the ballroom, signaling the beginning of the end. The air inside the grand historic hotel always smelled the same, a distinct, comforting blend of beeswax polish, old money, and fresh white lilies. From my vantage point on the mezzanine balcony, I looked down at the ballroom floor below. It was a sea of crystal and velvet. 50 round tables were set with military precision, the silverware gleaming under the soft amber glow of the chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks from the ceiling. This was the 5th annual Roots and Wings Gala, a fundraising dinner dedicated to providing scholarships and housing for orphan teenagers aging out of the foster care system. It was the premier charity event of the season in Chicago. And every single detail, from the color of the napkins to the font on the place cards, had to be perfect. I wasn't just the CEO of the nonprofit organizing it. I was the architect of a stability I had never known myself. I walked down the sweeping staircase, my heels clicking a steady, authoritative rhythm against the marble. I paused at table 4. To anyone else, it looked flawless, but I spotted it immediately. The floral centerpiece was rotated 2 inches to the left, obscuring the view of the stage. I reached out and gently corrected it, my fingers brushing against the cool petals of a hydrangea. A waiter, an older gentleman named Arthur who had worked at the hotel since before I was born, rushed over with a look of concern. I waved him off with a warm smile. "It's fine, Arthur," I said, smoothing the tablecloth. "We serve excellence here, not just dinner. Excellence is in the details." Arthur nodded, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. He knew I wasn't some figurehead who showed up for the applause. I was usually the first one in the building and the last one out. I believed in earning my place in the world. That belief was a hard-won souvenir from a life that had been dismantled 14 years ago. As I stood there watching the staff light the votive candles, the memory hit me with the familiar dull ache of an old bone fracture in rainy weather. I was 15 years old again, standing on the curb of our suburban driveway, watching a for sale sign being hammered into the lawn. My parents, Linda and Rick, were in their early 50s then, but they refused to acknowledge it. They had been seized by a midlife crisis so severe it shattered our family. They didn't want a mortgage, they didn't want stability, and they certainly didn't want a sullen, bookish teenager who reminded them that they were aging. They wanted to be digital nomads. They wanted to be the wandering Hopkins. They sold everything: the house, the cars, the furniture. They bought a massive, sleek RV and announced they were going to travel the world documenting their ageless lifestyle on social media. I remembered the conversation in the kitchen as if it were recorded on a loop in my brain. "Chloe, honey," my mother had said, checking her reflection in a spoon, "you're just baggage right now. You're too serious. You cramp the vibe. Your Aunt Sharon has plenty of room in her basement." They took my younger sister Bella because she was 8, blonde and photogenic, the perfect prop for their family adventure posts. I was left on a doorstep with 2 suitcases and a distinct understanding that I was disposable. I watched their taillights fade and I made a vow. I would never be baggage again. I would be the one driving the bus. My phone buzzed against my hip, snapping me back to the present. The ballroom was perfect. The guests would be arriving in 20 minutes. I pulled the device from the pocket of my silk dress. It was a text from Hank, my head of security. Hank was a retired police officer, a man of few words and zero patience for nonsense. The text was simple: "Problem at the valet. You need to see this." Attached was a still image from the exterior security feed. My stomach turned over, a mix of nausea and icy recognition. Parked haphazardly across 3 spaces in the pristine valet circle, right next to a line of Bentleys and Mercedes, was a vehicle that looked like a clown car had collided with a dumpster. It was an RV, but not the sleek one from 14 years ago. This one was rusted painted in peeling psychedelic colors with a bumper sticker that read, "Honk if you're free." Standing outside it arguing with the poor valet captain were three figures. I zoomed in on the screen. There was Linda wearing a flower crown and a dress made of ripped denim and feathers, an outfit appropriate for a teenage music festival, not a black tie gala. Next to her was Rick, sporting a gray man bun and a vest with no shirt underneath, looking like an aging rock star who had lost the band. And behind them, looking mortified and exhausted, was Bella. She was 22 now, but she looked older. Her posture slumped in defeat. They were waving cell phones around, undoubtedly live streaming their oppression at being asked to move their illegal vehicle. They say their press, Hank's voice crackled in my earpiece a moment later, claims they're here to cover the event for their followers. They're demanding entry and access to the buffet. Do you want me to trespass them? I can have PD here in 5 minutes. I stared at the screen. They looked desperate. They looked ridiculous. They looked like children trapped in the bodies of adults still chasing a fantasy that had clearly failed them, considering they were trying to crash a charity dinner for free food. 14 years of silence, and this was how they returned. Not with a phone call, not with an apology, but with a scene at the valet stand. The old Chloe, the 15-year-old girl who cried herself to sleep in a basement, wanted to scream. She wanted to have them thrown off the property. She wanted to storm out there and demand to know why she wasn't good enough to keep. But the woman I had become, the CEO, the philanthropist, the adult, saw something else. I saw an opportunity. "No, Hank," I said, my voice steady and cool, surprising even myself. "Don't call the police. Let them in." "Ma'am?" Hank sounded confused. "They're dressed like, well, they're not dressed for this." "I know," I replied, watching my mother on the screen as she tried to take a selfie with a confused donor walking past. "Treat them like legitimate press, give them full access, but tell the production crew to keep a dedicated camera on them. If they want attention, Hank, we're going to give them the attention they deserve." I hung up the phone and looked out over the empty ballroom one last time. My parents had spent their lives pretending to be something they weren't. Tonight, surrounded by people who understood the true value of community and sacrifice, they were going to show the world exactly who they were. I wasn't going to ruin them with anger. I was going to let them ruin themselves with the truth. It is a terrible thing to realize your parents are not heroes and not even villains, but simply fools. I know I'm likely not the only one who has had to parent their own parents, or who has felt the sting of being left behind by the people who were supposed to protect them. If you have ever had to build your own life from the wreckage your family left behind, or if you've ever had to smile through the embarrassment of a relative's behavior, I'd be honored if you shared your story in the comments below. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. The doors to the grand ballroom opened at 7 o'clock, sharp, admitting a steady stream of tuxedos, floor-length gowns, and the quiet, confident murmur of old wealth. I stood near the podium, greeting key donors with a practiced grace, shaking hands, and exchanging pleasantries about the unseasonably warm November weather. But my attention was split. My eyes kept darting to the periphery of the room, to the service entrance near the kitchens, where Hank had been instructed to direct the VIP press. And then they appeared. If the ballroom was a delicately painted oil masterpiece, my family was a neon graffiti tag sprayed directly across the center of the canvas. It was impossible to miss them. Amidst the sea of black navy and champagne-colored silk, my mother Linda was a riot of tie-dye and distressed denim. She wore a skirt that was essentially a belt made of frayed jean scraps, paired with a crocheted top that revealed far too much sun-damaged skin for a charity gala. A crown of artificial daisies sat crookedly on her head, shedding plastic petals with every step she took. My father, Rick, was trailing behind her, holding a selfie stick, aloft like a scepter. He was wearing cargo shorts at a black tie event, and a velvet vest with no shirt underneath his chest. Hair gray and wiry. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment crawl up my neck. A physical reaction I thought I had grown out of years ago. It wasn't just that they were underdressed. It was the way they moved. They didn't walk. They strutted with an unearned confidence, scanning the room, not for people to talk to, but for backdrops to pose against. Control this is lens. A deep, familiar voice crackled in my earpiece. Target acquired, and wow, just wow. You weren't kidding about the feathers. I touched the small bud in my ear, turning slightly away from a donor to whisper, keep the shot steady, lens. I want everything documented, every awkward interaction, every stolen canapé. Copy that, Lens replied, his tone rich with a mixture of amusement and protective anger. I've got camera 2 on the father. He's currently, I think he's trying to adjust the lighting on a sconce to better illuminate his good side. I watched from across the room as Rick reached up and physically tilted an antique brass sconce, nearly knocking it off the wall. A passing waiter looked horrified, but Rick just waved him off, pointing at his phone as if to say, don't you know who I am? I'm creating content. They began to make their way toward the buffet, moving with the predatory speed of people who hadn't seen a free meal in days. This was the influencer behavior I remembered from the early days of their abandonment, but it had metastasized into something far more desperate. They weren't just living the lifestyle, they were consuming it. I watched Linda elbow a heavy-set woman in a Chanel suit out of the way to get to the shrimp cocktail. She didn't take a plate. She simply grabbed a handful of shrimp by the tails, holding them up to the camera phone in her other hand. I could see her lips moving, exaggerating her expressions, likely shouting to her 12 remaining livestream viewers about the exclusive access she had secured. She bit into a shrimp, chewed with her mouth open, and then tossed the tail onto the pristine white tablecloth of an unoccupied table. Gross, Lens muttered in my ear. She just double-dipped, alerting the kitchen to swap the sauce bowl. Let them eat, I whispered back, forcing myself to smile as Mr. Sterling, the owner of a chain of luxury car dealerships, approached me. Chloe, Mr. Sterling boomed, extending a hand. Marvelous turnout, simply marvelous. And the decor, exquisite. Thank you, Robert, I said, shaking his hand firmly. We wanted to create an atmosphere of warmth. These children need to know they are valued. Indeed, indeed. He nodded, then frowned slightly, looking over my shoulder. Although, I must ask, who are the colorful individuals near the ice sculpture, part of the entertainment? I didn't turn around. I knew exactly what he was seeing. They are documenting the event, I said, carefully threading the needle between truth and lie. We believe in transparency. Modern times. Sterling chuckled clearly, assuming it was some avant-garde performance art he was too old to understand. Well, carry on. As Sterling moved away, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. I risked another glance. They were getting closer. They were moving through the room, essentially hunting for clout. They would stop random guests, people who had donated thousands of dollars to be here, and aggressively stick a phone in their faces, asking them to say hi to the tribe or drop their socials. The guests looked bewildered, backing away with polite, terrified smiles. Then I saw Bella. My sister was trailing 10 feet behind our parents, looking like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She wasn't wearing feathers or cargo shorts. She was wearing a faded, slightly stained sundress that looked like it had been washed in a river. Her blonde hair, once the center of my parents' obsession, was pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't filming. She was holding her mother's oversized boho bag, acting as the pack mule. She looked up, scanning the room, and for a terrifying second, her eyes locked onto the area where I was standing. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. If she recognized me, if she shouted my name, the game would change. I wasn't ready for a confrontation yet. I needed the room to see them, really see them, before I stepped in. I quickly turned my back, pretending to adjust the microphone stand on the dais. I kept my head down, listening to the chatter in my earpiece. She didn't make you, Len said softly. She's looking for a bathroom, I think. She looks tired, Chloe. I know, I whispered, gripping the cold metal of the stand. She looks exhausted. The parents are on the move again, Lenz reported, his voice hardening. They found the VIP tables. They're eyeing the silverware. Camera 1 is zooming in. Rick just tested the weight of a sterling silver fork. He's checking the hallmark on the back. I turned slowly. Sure enough, my parents were hovering over table 1, the table reserved for the city council members who hadn't arrived yet. The table was set with the hotel's finest silver, heavy antique pieces that were worth a small fortune. Rick was holding a fork up to the light, squinting at it. Linda was whispering something to him, opening the mouth of her oversized bag. They weren't just tacky. They were thieves. The realization hit me with a profound, aching sadness that I hadn't expected. I thought I would feel angry. I thought I would feel vindicated. But watching them standing there, plotting to steal forks from a charity dinner for orphans, I just felt pity. They had abandoned me to travel the world to be free to live a life of glamour. And 14 years later, this was the result. They were scavengers. They were grifters in costume, crashing a party they couldn't afford, stealing scraps from tables set for children who had nothing. They hadn't grown. They hadn't evolved. They were exactly the same selfish, short-sighted people they had been the day they drove away. Only now, the world had moved on without them. "Chloe," Len said, his voice gentle. "You okay? You've got 60 seconds before you need to take the stage." "I'm fine." I lied. I wasn't fine. I was mourning the parents I never had, the people I wish they could be. But I was also steeling myself. "Keep the cameras rolling. Lens," I said, straightening my spine. "Don't cut away. Not for a second." "I'm with you," he replied. "We're all with you." I looked at my parents one last time. Rick was slipping a silver spoon into his pocket, looking around furtively. Linda was grabbing a linen napkin to wrap up a half-eaten bread roll. They thought they were the main characters of this story. They thought they were outsmarting the system. They had no idea that the baggage they left behind was about to hand them the bill. It's a strange and lonely feeling to look at your parents and realize that you are the adult in the room. It defies the natural order of things. We expect our parents to be our pillars, our moral compasses, but sometimes time reveals them to be just flawed, people who never quite grew up. If you've ever had that moment where the roles reversed, where you felt more maturity in your little finger than your parents held in their entire bodies, I want to hear from you. I want to hear. It's a heavy burden to carry alone. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. The pleasant chime of the dinner bell echoed through the ballroom, signaling the end of the cocktail hour. The overhead chandeliers dimmed slowly, mimicking a sunset, until the room was bathed in a respectful, hushed twilight. A single crisp spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the stage where I stood. I smoothed the skirt of my gown, took a breath that filled my lungs with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, and stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent. 500 faces turned toward me, captains of industry, philanthropists, city officials. It was a moment of absolute power, the kind of moment my parents had spent their entire lives chasing, but never capturing. They wanted eyes on them. I commanded them. "Good evening," I said, my voice projecting clear and steady without a tremor. "And welcome to the 5th annual Roots and Wings Gala. Tonight we are here to rewrite the stories of children who have been told that they do not matter." As I began my speech explaining the mission of our nonprofit, I kept my eyes fixed on the back of the room. The darkness of the ballroom was designed to focus attention on the stage, but it also provided a false sense of security for those lurking in the shadows. I could see the faint blue glow of the production monitors in the tech booth, and I could hear the rhythmic breathing of Lenz in my earpiece. "Target is on the move," Lenz whispered, his voice cutting through my own narration in my head. "They think the lights being down means they're invisible. They're at the dessert station. No, wait. They're moving to the unassigned seating area in the back corner. The overflow tables." I continued speaking to the audience, my cadence rhythmic and practiced. "We provide housing, we provide mentorship, but most importantly, we provide dignity. They're opening the bag, Lenz reported. Rick is clearing the table. He's taking the entire place setting. Knife, fork, spoon. He's wrapping them in a cloth napkin. Linda is acting as lookout. Oh God, she's putting the salt and pepper shakers in her bra. I felt a surge of nausea, but I tamped it down. This was it. The trap was set. Behind me was a massive 20-foot projection screen. Currently, it displayed the Roots and Wings logo, a tasteful golden tree. But it was connected to a live feed switcher that Lenz controlled. I want to show you something, I said to the audience, deviating slightly from the teleprompter. Usually, at this point in the evening, we show you a video of the children we help. We show you their struggles, their resilience. But tonight, I want to talk about the other side of the equation. I want to talk about what happens when adults refuse to grow up. I signaled the booth with a subtle nod. Lenz, I commanded internally. Go live. Behind me, the golden tree vanished. In its place, projected 20 feet high in glorious 4K resolution, appeared my parents. They had no idea. The camera Lenz was using was equipped with a high ISO night vision lens, capable of piercing the ballroom's gloom. On the screen, they were lit up as if it were high noon. The image was crisp, unforgiving, and horrifyingly hilarious. Rick was hunched over the table like a raccoon in a garbage bin. He was aggressively shoving a handful of silver teaspoons into the deep pockets of his cargo shorts. The weight of the stolen silver was already pulling his shorts down, revealing the elastic band of his underwear. Linda was beside him, her mouth stuffed full of a dinner roll she hadn't finished chewing, while she used her free hand to sweep the contents of a bread basket into her oversized boho bag. Bella stood a few feet away, her back to them, her head in her hands, utterly defeated. The reaction in the room was instantaneous. It started as a ripple of confusion. A few people gasped. Then a low murmur of disbelief washed over the crowd like a tide. Heads turned. People squinted at the screen, then turned in their chairs to look toward the back of the room where the real-life drama was unfolding. My parents, oblivious to the giant screen behind me, continued their heist. Rick held up a butter knife, inspected it, and gave Linda a thumbs up. I leaned into the microphone. I didn't scream. I didn't sound angry. I let my voice drop into a register of profound, heartbreaking pity. Ladies and gentlemen, I said softly. The room went dead silent again. I apologize for the interruption, but it seems we have some unexpected guests tonight who are in desperate need of our assistance. On the screen, Rick froze. He had heard my voice amplify, but he hadn't processed the words. He looked up confused. It is easy to judge. I continued, gesturing vaguely toward the screen without turning around. We see people struggling and we assume the worst. But look at these poor souls, wandering, lost, hungry enough to hoard bread rolls, desperate enough to take the very spoons we use to feed orphans. The crowd shifted. They weren't angry anymore. They were confused, and then guided by my tone, they became sympathetic. This was a charity gala after all. These people were primed to help the helpless. And my parents looked helpless. They looked pathetic. We talk about influencers, I said, injecting a note of tragic irony into the word. But perhaps we should call them what they are. The forgotten generation. Adults who chased a digital fantasy until they lost touch with reality. They have no home. They have no silverware of their own. They are forced to crash charitable events just to feel part of a community. Linda stopped chewing. She slowly turned her head and saw the monitor. The color drained from her face beneath her fake tan. The bread roll fell from her mouth. Oh my God, a woman in the front row whispered, loud enough to be heard. That's so sad. It is sad, I agreed, looking directly at the woman. So, I'm going to go off script. I am starting a new fund tonight. Let's call it the Elderly Influencers Fund. Let's help these two find their way back to dignity. If you have any spare change, not large checks, just spare change, perhaps a sandwich you aren't going to finish, please feel free to offer it to them. The humiliation was absolute. It wasn't the fury of a scorned daughter. It was the condescension of a pitying stranger. The room burst into a polite, confused applause, the kind of applause you give a toddler who has just fallen down. Rick dropped the butter knife. It clattered onto the floor with a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at the 500 people staring at him with sad eyes. His face turned a violent shade of red. "Hey!" Rick shouted, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at the darkness where Lenz was hiding. "You cameraman, you set us up. You told us this was a dark zone. Stop filming. This is illegal. I do not consent." He started marching toward the camera rig, his cargo shorts jingling with every step. Linda scrambled after him, trying to cover her face with her bag, but the bag was so heavy with stolen silverware that she could barely lift it. "Cut the feed," Rick screamed, approaching the scaffolding where Len stood. "I'll sue you. I'll sue this whole hotel. Do you know who I am? I have 12,000 followers." "I don't think they know who you are, Rick," I said into the mic, my voice calm. "But I think they're about to find out." Rick reached the camera platform. "Put the camera down," he yelled at the operator. The cameraman, a tall, broad-shouldered figure dressed in black tactical gear, didn't flinch. He slowly lowered the heavy camera, setting it gently on the deck. He reached up and unclipped the headset, pulling it off to reveal a face that mirrored my own sharp jawline, dark eyes, and an expression of steely resolve. He stepped out of the shadows and into the edge of the spotlight. Rick stopped dead. He blinked, squinting. "Who?" "Hello, Dad," the cameraman said. His voice wasn't amplified, but in the silent room it carried perfectly. Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. Leo. It was my brother, Leo, the son they had forgotten to call for 10 years, the son who had been 19 when they left, who had worked 3 jobs to put himself through college while they posted photos of sunsets in Bali. The son who was now the director of operations for my company, a man who had built a life of substance while they built a life of smoke. You work here," Linda whispered, peeking out from behind Rick. "I run this," Leo corrected, stepping down from the platform to stand next to me. He towered over our father. "Chloe runs the company. I run the logistics. We built this, all of it." He gestured to the room, the crystal, the velvet, the donors, the millions of dollars in potential funding. "We did this," Leo said, his voice hard. "Without you, in spite of you." Rick looked from Leo to me. He looked at the stolen spoons weighing down his pockets. He looked at the crowd of wealthy, successful people who were now looking at him not with anger, but with the sort of distaste one reserves for a cockroach at a wedding. The cool influencer mask shattered. There was no hashtag to save him from this. There was no filter to smooth over the reality that he was a thief standing in the empire his abandoned children had built. Rick stammered, his bravado evaporating into the cool air of the ballroom. We were just hungry." "I know," I said, stepping down from the stage to stand beside my brother. "We presented a united front, a wall of success that they could not breach. That's why we're going to help you, but not because we owe you. Because unlike you, we grew up." I turned to the security guards who had quietly materialized at the perimeter. "Please escort our guests to the green room, give them a warm meal, and please retrieve the silverware." The twist wasn't the video. The twist was the mercy. And as the guards gently took my parents by the elbows, guiding them away from the staring eyes of the crowd, I realized that the revenge I had fantasized about for years had finally happened. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply turned the lights on. The silence inside the executive office was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums. Just minutes ago, we had been in a ballroom filled with 500 applauding donors and the clinking of crystal glasses. Now the only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the soft rhythmic clicking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Hank, my head of security, had ushered my family into the room with professional efficiency, closing the heavy oak door behind us. It locked with a decisive thud, sealing the 5 of us in a space that smelled of leather bindings and lemon oil, the scent of a life ordered, managed, and secure. I walked around the massive mahogany desk and sat in my chair. It was a power move, instinctive and necessary. Leo remained standing by the door, his arms crossed over his chest, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. Opposite us, huddled on a leather sofa meant for casual meetings, were Linda and Rick. Bella sat apart from them on a wingback chair, pulling at a loose thread on her dress, refusing to make eye contact. Rick was the first to break the silence. He cleared his throat, a nervous, jagged sound, and tried to flash a smile. It was a ghost of the smile I remembered from my childhood, the charming, lopsided grin he used to charm waitresses and traffic cops. But now, framed by a gray beard and sunken cheeks, it just looked desperate. "Well," he said, slapping his knees as if we had just finished a casual brunch. "That was quite the production, Chloe. Dramatic, very cinematic. You always did have a flair for the theatrical. Remember that play in third grade, the one where you were the tree? I was the narrator. Rick," I corrected, my voice flat. "And I wrote the play." "Right, right." He nodded, quickly shifting in his seat. The pockets of his cargo shorts clanked. He flinched at the noise. "Look about the misunderstanding out there. We were just engaging with the environment. Immersive journalism, you know how the algorithm loves controversy." "Stop," Leo said. He didn't shout. He just dropped the word into the room like an anvil. "Just stop." Rick's smile faltered. He looked at Leo, really looked at him for the first time. "Leo, sport, come on. Don't be so stiff. We're family. We're the Hopkins tribe. We stick together." "You left us?" Leo said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You sold the house, you packed the RV, and you drove away. You didn't stick together. You stuck it to us." "We were finding ourselves," Linda piped up, her voice shrill. She was clutching her bag to her chest like a shield. "We were suffocating in suburbia. We needed to show the world that life doesn't end at 40. We did it for you, really, to show you that you can follow your dreams." "You did it for the likes," I said, leaning forward. "And look where it got you. Stealing forks from a charity dinner for orphans." I nodded to Hank, who was standing in the corner. He stepped forward and held out a plastic bin. "Empty the pockets, please. And the bag." Rick hesitated, his dignity warring with his reality. Slowly, painfully, he reached into his shorts. He pulled out the silver spoons, the butter knife, a heavy serving fork. He dropped them into the bin with a series of loud, humiliating clangs. Linda followed suit, shaking the bread rolls and salt shakers out of her bag. The pile of stolen goods sat between us on the desk, a shiny, pathetic monument to their freedom. "We were going to return them," Rick mumbled, unable to look at me. "It was a prank." "No, it wasn't." A quiet voice cut through the air. We all turned. It was Bella. She hadn't spoken since they entered. She stood up, her hands trembling. "Bella, honey, hush," Linda hissed. "The adults are talking." "I am 22 years old, Mom," Bella shouted, the sudden volume making Rick jump. Tears began to stream down her face, cutting tracks through the layer of grime on her cheeks. "I am an adult. I've been an adult since I was 8, and I had to hold the camera while you tried to park that stupid RV." She turned to me, her eyes wide and desperate. "I hate it," she sobbed. "I hate the van. I hate the tribe. I hate smiling for the camera when we haven't showered in 3 days. I hate pretending we're having an adventure when we're just homeless." The word hung in the air. Homeless. "Bella," Rick snapped, his face reddening. "We are not homeless. We are houseless by choice. We are citizens of the world. We park in Walmart parking lots because we can't afford campgrounds," Bella screamed back. She looked at me, then at the office, then at her own reflection in the glass of a framed diploma on the wall. You guys were the lucky ones. You got left behind. You got to go to school. You got to sleep in beds. I got dragged along as a prop for a channel that nobody watches anymore." She collapsed back into the chair, burying her face in her hands. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. The influencer mask had been ripped off. The illusion was dead. I looked at my parents, really looked at them. Without the filter of anger or the lens of a camera, I saw the truth. Rick's hands were shaking, not from adrenaline, but likely from malnutrition or exhaustion. Linda's boho chic clothes were threadbare. Her eyes were rimmed with red. They weren't villains. They weren't evil masterminds who had plotted to destroy me. They were just two foolish, selfish people who had gambled everything on a narcissistic fantasy and lost. Linda slumped. The fight went out of her. She let the heavy bag slide to the floor. We just wanted to be special, Linda whispered, her voice cracking. Everyone else was getting old. Everyone else was boring. We wanted to be relevant. You wanted to be famous, Leo said coldly, and you traded your children for it. We're broke, Chloe. Linda admitted the confession, spilling out like bile. The ad revenue dried up 3 years ago. The RV needs a new transmission. We barely had gas money to get here. When we saw the gala online, when we saw how successful you were, we thought maybe we could just get in, get some food, maybe network, steal some silver, I added. We were hungry, Rick whispered. He sounded very old. We were just hungry. I leaned back in my chair. For years, I had rehearsed this moment. I had imagined screaming at them. I had imagined throwing money in their faces and telling them to get out. I had imagined 100 different ways to make them hurt the way I had hurt. But looking at them now, broken, dirty, and begging in my office, I realized that revenge is a hollow meal. Punishing them wouldn't fix the past. It wouldn't give me back my teenage years. And frankly, seeing them this low, it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt sad. It felt like looking at a car crash. I'm not going to call the police, I said quietly. Rick's head snapped up, but hope flaring in his eyes. You're not... No, I said, and I'm not going to give you money. I'm not going to give you a platform. I'm not going to tag you in a post. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights. I was the CEO. I was the philanthropist. I was the adult. The revenge I wanted, I said, speaking to the reflection of the city, was to show you what I became without you. I did that tonight. And honestly, it's enough. Seeing you like this, it's punishment enough. I turned back to them. But I won't let you drag Bella down with you anymore. She's our daughter. Rick started, trying to muster some authority. She's a hostage, Leo corrected, stepping forward. And tonight the hostage situation ends. I looked at Bella. You can stay, I said to her. If you want, you can have a shower, a bed, a life. Bella looked up. Her makeup smeared her expression, stunned. She looked at her parents, then at me. Slowly, she nodded. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice final. You have a choice. You can keep driving that RV until the wheels fall off, or you can admit that the show is canceled. There are few things in life as painful as watching the people who were supposed to be your giants shrink down to their true size. It forces you to realize that you can no longer blame them for your life because they have no power over you anymore. It's a liberation, but a lonely one. If you've ever had to become the parent to your own parents, or if you've had to make the hard choice to break a cycle for the sake of your own sanity, I want to hear your story. It's a brave step to take. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. The phrase, the show is canceled, hung in the air like smoke after a fire. For a solid minute, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the hard drive in my computer, backing up the security footage that had just ended their careers. Rick looked at Linda, his eyes searching for the familiar spark of delusion that usually fueled them. The manic energy that said, we can spin this, we can pivot. But Linda just sat there, staring at her chipped nail polish, the weight of the stolen silverware bin on the desk between us, acting as a tombstone for their dignity. She looked small. She looked her age. Rick, Linda whispered, her voice trembling. I can't sleep in that parking lot again. My back hurts. I'm always cold. Rick looked at her and his shoulders slumped. The posture of the ageless wanderer evaporated, replaced by the slump of a 60-year-old man with no pension, no home, and no plan. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the device that had been his compass, his boss, and his god for 14 years. He looked at the cracked screen, then looked at me. "I'm tired, Chloe," he said, his voice rough with a vulnerability I hadn't heard since I was a child. "I am just so tired." "Then stop running," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "Stop pretending." Rick placed the phone on my desk face down. It was a surrender. "I'm sorry," he choked out. He didn't look at the camera. He looked me in the eye. "I'm sorry we left. We thought if we kept moving, we wouldn't have to face getting old. We thought you were strong enough to handle it, but we were just weak." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase 14 years of missed birthdays or the trauma of being abandoned on a driveway. But it was real. It was the first honest thing he had said to me in a decade. "Apology noted," I said. I looked at Leo. We didn't need to speak. We had already discussed the contingency plan. Leo stepped forward, sliding a single sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. "This is a contract," Leo said, his tone businesslike. "We are not giving you cash. We are not buying you a new RV. That vehicle goes to the scrapyard tomorrow." "But," Rick started a reflex of protest. "Scrapyard," Leo repeated. "Here is the offer. We have secured a one-bedroom apartment in the city. It is clean, it is safe, and the rent is paid directly by the Roots and Wings Foundation under our emergency rehousing initiative. You will live there. You will delete your social media accounts. All of them. The wandering Hopkins are dead." Linda gasped softly, but she didn't argue. "Bella," I said, turning to my sister, "you're coming to stay with me for a while. Then we're getting you into the graphic design program you used to talk about before they dragged you on the road. You're going to have your own life." Bella started to cry again, but this time, it was a quiet, relieved weeping. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was tight, desperate. "And for you too," I continued, looking at my parents. "You need to work, not as influencers, as people. We have openings in the warehouse, sorting donations, organizing inventory, minimum wage, hard work. You punch a clock. You earn your keep. If you miss a shift, the rent stops. If you post a selfie, the rent stops." Rick looked at the paper. He looked at his hands, soft, from years of holding nothing heavier than a selfie stick. Then he looked at Linda, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He picked up the pen. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." 6 months later, the air in my dining room smelled of roasted sage turkey and wood smoke. It was Thanksgiving, a holiday I usually spent working, or at a donor dinner. But this year the table was set for 5. The centerpiece was straight. I had checked it 3 times. The doorbell rang. Leo walked in, first carrying a bottle of wine and a look of amused skepticism. "They're parking," he said. "Dad is complaining about the parallel parking, which is a good sign. Means he's worried about denting the car." A moment later, Rick and Linda walked in. The transformation wasn't magical. They hadn't turned into different people, but the edges had been sanded down. Rick was wearing a flannel shirt tucked into khakis. No vest, no man bun. His hair was cut short and neat. He looked like a grandfather, which I suppose is what he was supposed to be. Linda wore a simple sweater and jeans. She looked healthier, having gained a few pounds now that she was eating regular meals instead of buffet scraps. "Happy Thanksgiving," Rick said, handing me a store-bought apple pie. It wasn't fancy, but he had bought it with his own money earned from 6 months of packing boxes at the warehouse. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad," I said, taking the pie. Bella came down the stairs. She looked vibrant. Her hair was clean cut into a sharp bob. She was wearing glasses and carrying a sketchbook. She hugged our parents, and for the first time in my memory, she didn't look like she was bracing for impact. Dinner was normal. That was the most miraculous part of it. It was boring. We didn't talk about engagement metrics or viral trends. Rick talked about the new shelving system he had implemented at the warehouse. He took a strange, fastidious pride in it. "You can't just throw the winter coats in with the bedding, Chloe," he lectured me, pointing with his fork. You have to categorize by size. Efficiency is key. I caught Leo's eye across the table. He smirked and hid it behind his wine glass. It was absurd that the man who had abandoned us was now lecturing me on responsibility, but it was also undeniably better than the alternative. Linda helped me clear the table. In the kitchen, away from the men, she paused while rinsing a plate. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking at me. "For the job. For stopping us." "You're welcome," I said, drying a glass. It needed to stop. "I know," she sighed. I think we were just afraid of being ordinary. But ordinary is actually quite nice, isn't it? It's warm. It's underrated," I agreed. We moved back into the living room for coffee. I looked around the room. My family was stitched back together. It wasn't a seamless repair. The scars were there, visible and thick. We would never be the family on the greeting card. There was too much history, too much hurt for that. But we were here. We were safe. And we were real. Rick sat in the armchair, his eyes closing as the tryptophan hit. He looked peaceful. He wasn't chasing a sunset for a thumbnail. He was just a man resting after a week of work. I realized then that my revenge hadn't been the humiliation at the gala. That was just the intervention. The revenge was this, forcing them to live a life of dignity whether they wanted to or not. I had taken their chaos and imposed order upon it. I had proven that while you cannot change the past, you can absolutely build a future, brick by brick, standard by standard. We had survived the crash, and now finally we were just driving home. Healing a family isn't about forgetting the damage. It's about deciding that the foundation is still worth saving, even if you have to rebuild the whole house yourself. It requires boundaries, tough love, and the courage to demand respect. If you have ever had to be the rock for a family that was crumbling, or if you found peace in the ordinary after a lifetime of chaos, I'd love to hear how you managed it. Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. That concludes Chloe's journey, a reminder that true growth often requires tough love and firm boundaries. Have you ever had to parent your own parents or make difficult choices to break a toxic cycle? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Radiance. We'll see you next time.